Hey guys, this is Mr. O'Brien again here, and this is your Topic 4 review for the Keystone Biology Exam. Now, Topic 4 covers energy, how organisms make energy, and how they obtain that energy from the environment. So, organisms obtain energy in a couple different ways. So, there's an autotroph is an organism that makes their own energy. So, for example, a tree, right? So a tree performs photosynthesis. So what happens is light strikes that tree and they are able to turn light and carbon dioxide into energy. Now the photosynthetic organisms, those are the basis for all food chains in our ecosystem. Now we also have these things called chemotrophs. Now chemotrophs make energy using organic molecules. So like for example our volcanic vent. So tube worms, what happens is volcanic vents release sulfur, okay? And that sulfur is able to be harnessed and converted into energy in these organisms. So again, photosynthesis uses light, okay? Chemosynthesis uses chemicals, okay? Organic chemicals to be specific, so like sulfur, things like that, okay? Now, heterotrophs, like Mr. Bear right here, they have to eat their food. So they have to eat something to gain energy. So we are an example of a heterotroph. We are omnivores where we eat both plants and animals. So photosynthesis makes energy using sunlight. Chemosynthesis make energy using organic molecules. Those are both autotrophs. So automatic, make their own energy. Heterotrophs need to consume something else. Now, the energy molecule that most objects use, or most living things use, is ATP. Now, ATP stands for adenine triphosphate. And ATP is a high energy molecule used for short-term storage. Now, our bonds, or our energy in these bonds, is stored in these bonds. So, for example, bond 1, bond 2, and bond 3. So, bond 1 has a high amount of energy. Okay, so this is where most of our energy is produced. So when ATP is broken down into ADP, energy is released. Okay, so again, ATP is our high energy molecule stored in these bonds. Now, the first mechanism we are going to talk about is cellular respiration. So this is the major way organisms like humans and bears harness energy. So the equation of cellular respiration is glucose, C6, H12, O6, and oxygen is broken down into CO2, or carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Now, this energy is in the form of ATP, okay? So here is our equation. We have glucose, we have oxygen, and that's converted into carbon dioxide, water vapor, and our ATP molecule. Again, this is cellular respiration, us breathing in and consuming something to make our energy. Now, cellular respiration can take two paths. It can either go aerobic or anaerobic. And aerobic is when oxygen is present in the body. Anaerobic is when we don't have any oxygen present in our body. So this is like when we are exercising and running, where oxygen is low and our body is in high demand of it. So aerobic respiration, this occurs in the mitochondria. So the mitochondria is our high energy molecule. So in other words, when we have air, we go into aerobic respiration in our mitochondria where most of the energy is made. So it goes through three steps. So step one is glycolysis. In glycolysis, we make 2 ATP and 2 NADH molecules. Okay, from the glycolysis, we go into what's known as the Krebs cycle. And in this one, we're just making molecules for our electron transport chain. So again, 2 more ATP are made. We make 4 CO2 molecules, 2 FADH, and 2 NADH. Now these 2 molecules right here, the FADH and the NADH, are used to go into the electron transport chain, which eventually makes the majority of our energy at 34 ATP. Again, aerobic respiration, it starts with a molecule of glucose, and it goes through this here, converts it into pyruvic acid, okay, goes through the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, to get our energy demands. Anaerobic respiration occurs in the cytoplasm, okay? And what happens, again, we still go into glycolysis, and again, we still make those 2 ATP molecules, but what happens is, after this step, we cannot enter into aerobic respiration, so we go into fermentation. Now, in fermentation, we make NAD+, and we make a little bit of energy, but not really that much. So in this, NADH is then used back into the glycolysis to keep this build up, so when air is available, we have a lot of energy stored up. So fermentation is when we have a lot of lactic acid that builds up into our muscles. So when you get tired from running, lactic acid builds up to tell your muscles that you are tired. So this is just like a mechanism to say, don't push too hard, or you could cause serious damage. So we need oxygen to produce a lot of that energy. But what happens is, in this step, we do this to kind of build up some of these products for when air is available. So to make most of our energy, we use what's known as the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain, it creates a high concentration of hydrogen ions in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So in other words, we're building up this, if this is our member, we're building up this high amount of hydrogen ions up here. And the reason that we're doing this is we're trying to send them back through something called the ATP synthase, or the ATP synthesis channel, which is I have as this green right here. So what happens is these hydrogens eventually start flowing through, and it spins a turbine which produces our ATP. So in other words, we want to build up this high concentration of hydrogens in order to make a large amount of ATP in this process. So the second reaction that we have is photosynthesis. So photosynthesis, we start with 6 CO2 or carbon dioxide molecules, 6 water molecules, and we need a little bit of energy, and that energy is in the form of light or sunshine, okay? We convert that into glucose, C6H12O6, and we also produce oxygen, okay? So again, you'll notice that the starting materials of photosynthesis are actually the byproducts of cellular respiration, and vice versa, okay? So the products of photosynthesis are the starting materials of cellular respiration. Again, this occurs in the chloroplast. And the chloroplast, remember, is the factory molecule in the cell. Now, the chlorophyll is where where it actually occurs, which is located inside the chloroplast, and this is what makes your plants green. So these green things are the chlorophyll that are located in the chloroplast to allow photosynthesis to occur. So again, we have 2 major steps here. The first one is the light reaction, and the light reaction is where light strikes the photosynthesis in the thyroid. So this uses light and water to produce oxygen, okay? And to produce ATP and NADH. Okay? And what we release in this is we release our O2 or oxygen molecule. So In other words, water is coming in, light is striking this, and what we are producing is this ATP and NADPH to go into the Calvin cycle to produce our glucose. So we give off oxygen as our byproduct in this. Okay? In step 2 in the Calvin cycle, we take that ATP, we take that NADPH, and we use CO2 from the atmosphere, okay? And we use this as it enters in the stomata to form together to produce glucose. So in the light reaction, we are producing oxygen and as a byproduct, and we're using this ATP and NADPH to enter into the Calvin cycle. In the Calvin cycle, that is where our glucose molecule is produced. And what happens here is pretty much the carbons from the CO2 bind together to form those glucoses. So again, what happens here is light enters in, okay, from sun, and we also have water molecules coming in as well. So as a result of the light reaction, we are getting oxygen as a byproduct and producing ATP and NADPH. And these enter into the Calvin cycle. Okay? Now the Calvin cycle takes in CO2 from the atmosphere and converts it into glucose, which is another carbon-based molecule. Now, after Calvin cycle goes through, ADP is produced and sent back over, and NADP is sent over. So it's a big cycle to produce our glucose and oxygen molecules. So why this is important is that, autotrophs make this energy, and they are also the basis for all food chains. So in other words, all of the energy starts right here. Okay, so plants take the energy from the sunlight, and that is what is transferred on to each one of the chains of the food web. So in other words, sunlight is the ultimate source of energy in almost all ecosystem. Okay, the sun produces all the energy. Okay, without the sun, our whole ecosystem system would collapse upon itself. Okay, so we have this idea that both plants and animals are related. So plants, let's draw this in green. Plants perform photosynthesis. Okay, and when they perform photosynthesis, what happens is oxygen and glucose is produced from photosynthesis. Now, this enters into animals, okay, which perform cellular respiration. And as a result of cellular respiration, animals produce or give off CO2 and water vapor, okay? CO2 and water vapor are what enter into plants and photosynthesis. The only energy that is added into this whole system is the sunlight to produce this. So you see how this whole system is interconnected right here. Plants produce or perform photosynthesis to produce and give off O2 and glucose. Animals take in that O2 and glucose and produce CO2 and water, which is what the plants take in. Okay? So again, both plants and animals, both photosynthesis and cellular respiration, are related and are one big giant cycle. So this is your topic for review. Hopefully this helps you out with energy, and hopefully this helps you out for the Keystone Biology Exam at the end of the year. This is Mr. O'Brien signing off.